February 14th, 2020. A logging road deep in the Olympic National Forest, Washington. A woman face down in the brush, no ID, 3 weapons beside her. A broken tequila bottle still wet with blood. She had flown 1,000 miles to see him. He drove her into the woods and never drove her out. So why did he wait until the day after her body was found to register the truck he used to take her there? It is close to midday on Valentine's Day when a hiker heads out along U.S. Forest Service Road 28 in the Buckhorn Wilderness. The rain has not stopped for days. Everything is green and brown, the permanent palette of the Pacific Northwest in February. Puddles fill the ruts in the logging road. The trail is rough, unpaved, barely wide enough for a single vehicle. This is not a place people come to casually. This is deep in the Olympic National Forest, miles from the nearest town, miles from cell service, miles from anything. The hiker is bundled up, trudging through the muck, when something breaks the pattern of the forest floor. A color that does not belong. Red, bright against the undergrowth. A few more steps and the red takes a shape. It is a person, lying face down, tangled in the brush at the edge of the road. The hoods of a sweatshirt and a jacket are pulled up over the head, covering the face. The hiker calls out. No response, no movement. They step closer. The red is not clothing, it is blood. They call 911. Clallam County Sheriff's deputies arrive within the hour. They make their way down the rutted logging road to the end of Forest Service Road 28-280. What they find is not an accident and not an animal attack. The victim is a young woman. She has 3 deep lacerations across her head, one of them so severe it has shaved through sections of her scalp. There are bruises across her jaw, her neck, her abdomen, her sides. There are cuts and scrapes in places that suggest she was struck from multiple angles. And on her fingers and wrists, defensive wounds. Clean, deliberate cuts that come from raising your hands to block a blade. She fought back. She fought hard. It was not enough. Near the body, 3 weapons lie in the mud: a folding knife, a blue box cutter, and a bottle of tequila, broken at the neck, the jagged glass dark with dried blood. 3 different weapons used on one person. That is not a fight that happened in a flash of anger. That is sustained. That is deliberate. Someone had time to pick up one weapon, use it, set it down, pick up another. The victim is still wearing her clothes, a heavy coat, layered clothing suitable for cold and wet weather, but not hiking gear, not boots designed for trails, no backpack, no water bottle, no trail map, no food, and no identification. Nothing in her pockets, nothing on her person, nothing anywhere near the body to say who this woman is. At the end of a logging road this remote, in a wilderness this vast, she is nobody. A Jane Doe on federal land. There is one detail at the scene that does not fit the profile of a random attack: the tequila bottle. It is not a cheap brand. It is not the kind of bottle you find discarded in the woods by a passing hiker. And it is not empty because it was consumed over days or weeks. The level of liquid still inside suggests it was opened recently, possibly that same night. Combined with the fact that there are no signs of robbery, no signs of sexual assault, and the victim is still fully clothed, this does not look like a stranger killing. This looks like 2 people who came out here together, who sat together, who drank together, and then one of them did not leave. Investigators note this. Whatever happened on this logging road, it began as something voluntary. She came here willingly. She came here with someone she knew. Investigators survey the road itself. It is barely a road. Unpaved, winding through dense forest, riddled with potholes and standing water. You do not walk here. You do not stumble upon this place while out for a stroll. You need a vehicle to reach the end of this road. Likely a truck, something with clearance, something that can handle the terrain. Deputies note impressions in the soft mud, tire tracks, wide, consistent with a full-size pickup. Someone drove to this spot, someone who knew this road existed, someone who knew that at the end of it, There was nothing, and no one. The FBI joins the investigation. The Buckhorn Wilderness sits on federal land within the Olympic National Forest. Any crime committed here falls under federal jurisdiction. Agents begin processing the scene, photographing the body, the weapons, the tire tracks, the surrounding brush. The King County Medical Examiner's Office performs the autopsy. Cause of death: homicide by multiple blunt and sharp force injuries. The wounds are primarily to the head and neck. The tequila bottle, the knife, and the box cutter were all likely used during the attack. This was not quick. This was not painless. The question is no longer what happened. The question is who she is, and who brought her to the end of this road. The answer to the first question comes within days. Because the victim has no identification, investigators lift fingerprints from the body and run them through every database available. They get a hit, not from a criminal database, but from the California Department of Motor Vehicles. Her prints are on file from a driver's license application. Her name is Dioneth Lopez, 21 years old, a resident of San Pablo, California, a small city in the Bay Area, over 1,000 miles south of where her body was found on a logging road in Washington State. Her family and friends described her as extremely friendly, outgoing, and spontaneous, the kind of person who made plans on a whim and followed through with a smile. She had just started a new job at Amazon. She was building something. She was 21, and the world was still wide open. But there is something off about the timeline. Dioneth's body was found on February 14th. She was not reported missing until February 15th, the day after. A friend back in California had filed the report with the San Pablo Police Department. That friend had been trying to reach Dioneth for days. Calls went to voicemail. Texts went unanswered. Nothing came back. Dioneth had told friends she was going to Washington State. Going to visit friends, she said, going hiking. A short trip, a few days away. Nothing out of character for someone as spontaneous as Dioneth. But no one in Washington had reported a missing hiker matching her description. No one in the Olympic Peninsula area knew she was coming. No missing persons report from anywhere in the state matched the Jane Doe found on Valentine's Day. She had arrived in Washington, and then she had simply ceased to exist. Think about what investigators had at this point. A 21-year-old woman from California, found murdered on a remote logging road in Washington. No identification on her body, not reported missing until the day after she was found. She told friends she was going hiking, but she was not dressed for hiking. No gear, no supplies, no plan that anyone could verify. And she was found at the end of a road that you cannot reach on foot. Tire tracks in the mud. Someone drove her there. Someone she trusted enough to get into a vehicle with in a state 1,000 miles from home. Investigators began pulling surveillance footage from towns surrounding the Olympic National Forest. Every gas station, every convenience store, every camera within a reasonable radius of the Buckhorn Wilderness. They were looking for Dioneth, or for anyone who might have been with her. The area around Sequim, the closest town to the forest, became the focus. And there, on footage from a local convenience store, they found her. The timestamp reads February 11th. Dioneth Lopez walks through the store wearing the exact same clothing she was found dead in. The heavy coat, the layered outfit. She is not alone. Beside her is a man. They moved through the store together, casual, unhurried. They leave together, and they get into a vehicle parked outside. A red pickup truck. A 1999 Chevy Silverado. The camera captures the license plate. Investigators run the plate. It comes back to a name. Alejandro Aguilera Rojas, 23 years old, a resident of Renton, Washington, a suburb south of Seattle. Married, with children. Before we get to what happened next, if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe. Because what investigators found next turned this case from a mystery into something much darker. Dioneth's friends and family in California filled in the picture that the crime scene could not. Dioneth had met Alejandro on Facebook approximately 2 years before her death. What started as online conversation had become a full relationship. Long distance, secret, and sustained over months and months of daily phone calls and messages. Dianeth knew Alejandro was married. She knew he had children. She had carried that knowledge for 2 years. But in the weeks before the trip, something had shifted. Dianeth had been telling friends she could not do it anymore. She could not keep the secret. She could not be the other woman and pretend it was not eating her alive. She told friends she needed to go to Washington. She needed to tell Alejandro's wife what had been going on. She needed to end the lie, one way or another. That was the real reason she booked the flight to Seattle on February 10th, 2020. Not hiking, not friends. Alejandro. And the truth she was determined to force into the open. When Dianeth stopped responding to messages after February 11th, her friends grew alarmed. They knew about Alejandro. They began reaching out to him on Facebook and by phone. "Where is she? Is she okay? Have you heard from her?" Alejandro answered. He told Dianeth's friend one story, that he had not heard from her since she had gone on a trip to Mexico back in November. He told Dianeth's mother a different story, that he had picked her up from the Seattle airport on February 10th and that she had gone on a hike with some friends. He did not know where she was after that. Two people, two completely different stories. One of them placed him at the airport with Dianeth on the day she arrived. The other claimed he had not seen her in months. He could not even keep his own lies consistent with each other. What made it worse was the silence from Dianeth's end. Her friends in California were not passive. From the moment she stopped responding, they had been doing everything they could. They called her phone, voicemail. They texted, no reply. They reached out on social media, tagging her, messaging her, asking anyone who might have seen her. Dianeth was the kind of person who responded to everything. She was never off the grid for more than a few hours. 3 days of nothing was unthinkable. Her friend Armando had been especially persistent, messaging Alejandro repeatedly on Facebook. "Where is she? What happened? Is she safe?" Alejandro's responses were vague, contradictory, and unhurried. He did not seem worried. He did not seem like a man whose friend had gone missing in the woods. He seemed like a man who already knew exactly where she was, because he had put her there. Investigators now had a name, a face on camera, and a license plate. They pulled cell phone records for both Dianeth and Alejandro. What the data showed was damning. On February 10th, both phones were together, moving from the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport southeast toward the Olympic Peninsula. On the evening of February 10th, both phones became stationary for approximately 7 hours near the Longhouse Market, a small store near the Seven Cedars Casino outside Sequim. Surveillance footage from the market confirmed that Alejandro's red Chevy Silverado was parked in the lot for most of the night. They had slept in the truck. 7 hours in a parking lot, in February, in the Pacific Northwest. The following day, February 11th, both phones moved together again, away from Sequim, deeper into the peninsula, toward the Olympic National Forest, toward U.S. Forest Service Road 28. Toward the end of the logging road where Dianeth's body would be found 3 days later. Then the phones moved again, both of them, together, back toward Renton, back to Alejandro's home. Both phones traveled back, but only one of them was being carried by someone who was still alive. Think about what that means. Dianeth's phone left the murder scene and went to Alejandro's house. Her body stayed on the logging road. He had driven her there, left her there, and taken her phone with him, whether deliberately or because it was still in the truck. And there was more. When investigators went to Alejandro's home, they found the red Chevy Silverado parked outside. The truck that had been captured on convenience store footage. The truck that matched the tire tracks on the logging road. But there was something different about it now. It was spotless, detailed, washed and scrubbed inside and out. A Clallam County officer had pulled Alejandro over on the evening of February 10th, the same day he picked Dianeth up from the airport. The reason for the stop was an expired license plate. The officer noted 2 things in his report. First, The truck was filthy, mud-caked, dirty inside and out. Second, there was a woman in the passenger seat. On February 10th, the truck was filthy and Dianeth was alive beside him. Days later, the truck was immaculate and Dianeth was dead on a logging road. The truck had been cleaned, thoroughly, deliberately, as if every surface that might carry a trace of her, a hair, a fingerprint, a drop of blood, had been wiped away. And then there was the detail that tied all of it together. Alejandro had purchased the red Chevy Silverado months before the murder. He had driven it for months. He had used it to pick Dianeth up from the airport. He had been pulled over in it by a police officer. But he had never registered the truck in his name. Not when he bought it. Not when he drove Dianeth to Squim. Not when the officer wrote down the expired plate. He had kept the truck untraceable, a vehicle that on paper did not belong to him. He registered it on February 15, 2020, one day after Dianeth's body was found, as if the moment he believed the danger had passed, the moment a hiker stumbled onto a body he thought no one would find for weeks, or maybe ever, he finally felt safe enough to put his name on the vehicle that had carried her to her death. On February 19th, 5 days after the body was discovered, FBI Special Agent Colleen Sanders and Clallam County detectives arrived at Alejandro's home. The red Silverado was parked outside, clean, registered, as if nothing had ever happened. They asked him to come in and talk. He agreed. Alejandro showed up to the interview wearing sunglasses. In late February, in Washington State. Maybe he wanted to look calm. Maybe he wanted to hide his eyes. The FBI agent introduced himself in a friendly tone. Because our missing person is from out of state, we got roped into helping out. We're just coordinating some interviews. Casual, no pressure. Coffee on the table. They started easy. What's your relationship with Dianeth? Alejandro said he met her about 2 years ago through a friend. They talked. They had a thing. But he was married. His wife did not know. He picked Dianeth up from the airport on February 10th. They hung out. Then she went to visit some friends. He dropped her off and that was the last he heard from her. She never called him back. The agent asked a simple question. So you dropped her off somewhere without seeing these friends? Yeah. And she never called you back or anything? No, she never called me back. Then the investigators showed him the phone records. The map with 2 dots, his phone and hers, traveling together to the exact GPS coordinates where her body was found on a logging road deep in the Olympic National Forest. And then both dots traveling back to his house. Alejandro's face changed. His story shifted. He said they had been arguing. They had stayed in his truck, drinking tequila the night before. The next day, the argument escalated. Dianeth told him she was going to tell his wife about the affair. She threatened to kill his wife and his child. She pulled out a knife and came at him. He had to defend himself. It was her or me, he said. He grabbed the tequila bottle and hit her over the head with it. She went down. She was still breathing when he left. He drove away. He thought she would sleep it off. The agents kept their composure. They had used a deliberate tactic throughout the interview. Disarm him. Give him an excuse. Make him feel like they understood. I think you were put in a bad scenario. She was pressuring you. You didn't want to lose your wife, your kids. He nodded along. He leaned into the narrative they were feeding him. She was going to kill my family. She was a psychopath. She'd been stalking me. But the physical evidence told a different story entirely. 3 deep lacerations to the head. Not one blow from a bottle, but repeated strikes. Cuts across her throat and jaw. A folding knife and a box cutter found beside the body, neither of which belonged to a woman who had packed no gear and carried no bag. Defensive wounds on her fingers and wrists, the kind of wounds that come from desperately trying to block a blade with your bare hands. This was not a single swing with a bottle. This was an attack with 3 different weapons, sustained long enough for the victim to raise her hands again and fail to stop what was being done to her. The agents asked Alejandro to stand up. They said they needed to photograph his back for documentation. Routine stuff, they told him. He stood, lifted his shirt. They took pictures. Then the agent said, "All right, go ahead and put your shirt back on. Stand up. Turn around with your hands behind your back. You're under arrest." They had waited for him to be off balance, shirt lifted, hands occupied, so they could cuff him cleanly. He did not resist. The man who had told 3 different stories to 3 different people in the span of 9 days had nothing left to say. But to understand the full weight of what Alejandro did, you have to go back to before Dianeth ever boarded that plane. The affair had been building for 2 years. Daily phone calls, constant messages on Facebook. A 21-year-old woman in California and a 23-year-old married father in Washington, separated by 1,000 miles but connected by a secret neither of them could put down. For Alejandro, the affair was something he kept in a separate compartment, away from his wife, his children, his daily life in Renton. For Dianeth, it had become something she could no longer contain. In the weeks leading up to February 2020, Dianeth had grown increasingly frustrated. She told friends she felt trapped, in love with a man who would never leave his wife, carrying a secret that was making her sick. She told them she had made a decision. She was going to Washington. She was going to tell Alejandro's wife everything. She was going to blow the whole thing open because she could not live inside the lie anymore. Whether Alejandro knew exactly what Dianeth intended before she boarded the plane, whether she told him directly, or whether he simply sensed that she was coming to destroy the life he had built, is something only he knows. But he picked her up from SeaTac Airport on the morning of February 10th. He did not take her to his home. He did not introduce her to anyone. He drove her to the Olympic Peninsula, 90 minutes from Seattle, deep into a part of the state where no one knew either of them. That evening, a Clallam County officer pulled the red Silverado over for expired plates. The truck was filthy. There was a woman in the passenger seat. The officer wrote a warning and let them go. It was the last time anyone outside of Alejandro would see Dianeth Lopez alive. They spent roughly 7 hours parked outside the Longhouse Market near Squim, most of it in the truck. What was said during those hours, the arguments, the pleas, the threats, the silence, died with Dianeth on the logging road the next day. By the morning of February 11th, Alejandro drove deeper, past the town, past the last camera, past the last house, into the Olympic National Forest, down Forest Service Road 28, to the end of a spur road that goes nowhere. It was there, at the end of a road that does not appear on most maps, surrounded by dense forest in every direction, that Dianeth Lopez's life ended. The medical examiner documented what was done to her. Multiple blunt and sharp force injuries, 3 deep lacerations to the head, cuts to the throat, jaw, and neck, bruises across the abdomen and sides, defensive wounds on the hands and wrists. She was struck with the tequila bottle. She was cut with the folding knife and the box cutter. The attack was prolonged. It involved 3 separate weapons. It was not a single moment of rage. It was a sustained assault on a young woman who raised her hands to protect herself and could not. Alejandro drove away. He took the road back out of the forest. He took the highway back to Renton. He cleaned the truck, every surface, inside and out. He went home. He went back to his wife and his children and his life. And for 3 days, Dianeth lay face down on the logging road, alone, in the rain, with no name and no one looking for her. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, a hiker found her. On February 15th, a friend in California reported her missing. On the same day, February 15th, Alejandro registered the red Chevy Silverado in his name for the first time. The truck he had owned for months. The truck that had been pulled over by a police officer with Dianeth alive in the passenger seat. The truck captured on camera at a convenience store the day before she died. The truck that carried her down a logging road she would never leave. He had kept it invisible, unregistered, untraceable on paper. And the moment he believed her body would never be connected to him, the moment after a hiker found what he had left in the woods, he made it official. He put his name on the one thing that tied him to everything. That single detail, the date on the registration, proved what the defensive wounds and the 3 weapons and the cleaned truck already suggested. This was not self-defense. This was not a fight that spiraled. A man does not drive a woman 90 minutes into a wilderness. A man does not keep a vehicle unregistered for months. A man does not scrub a truck from top to bottom and tell 3 different lies to 3 different people unless he already knows what he is going to do and what he needs to hide after he does it. In December 2021, Alejandro Aguilera Rojas pleaded guilty to 1 count of second-degree murder in United States District Court in Tacoma. The case was tried in federal court because the murder occurred on federal land, the Olympic National Forest. On May 16, 2022, he was sentenced to 200 months in federal prison, 16 years and 8 months. He was 25 years old at sentencing. U.S. Attorney Nick Brown called it a cruel and cold-hearted attack that robbed a family of a young and vibrant daughter, sister, and niece. At an earlier state hearing, prosecutor Michelle Devlin had described the crime more bluntly. The deceased was left essentially in the forest like a piece of trash. The red Chevy Silverado that Alejandro tried so hard to keep invisible, unregistered, scrubbed clean, disconnected from his name, became the single thread that unraveled everything. The convenience store camera, the traffic stop, the cell phone records, the tire tracks on the logging road, the registration dated 1 day after the body was found. Every piece of evidence in this case circled back to that truck. The truck he never wanted anyone to know was his. The truck that carried Dioneth Lopez to the last place she would ever see. 16 years and 8 months. Dioneth Lopez's family has said the sentence does not come close to what was taken from them. She was 21 years old. She had just started a new job. She was building a life. She was spontaneous and outgoing and full of something that the people around her could feel. She flew to Washington on February 10th, 4 days before Valentine's Day, to see the person she believed loved her back. She never called home. She never texted her friends. She never came back. The last image of Dioneth Lopez alive is a frame of surveillance footage from a convenience store in a small town she had never been to before, walking beside a man who, within hours, would leave her at the end of a road that goes nowhere. If someone you trusted asked you to get in their car and drive somewhere remote, how far would you go before you started asking questions? Tell me in the comments. There is another case, another woman who trusted the wrong person. Another body found in a place no one was supposed to look. And the detail that cracked it was something the killer carried in his own pocket the entire time.